Good evening and welcome back to another episode of The Longing, where today we are going to be continuing to read The Sleeper Awakes by H.G. Wells. So, let's get going. The sounds about him increased. Stumbling people passed him, speaking excitedly. They have surrendered. The council, surely not the council. They are saying so in the ways. The passage seemed wider. Suddenly the wall fell away. He was in a great space, and people were stirring remotely. He inquired his way of an indistinct figure. "Strike straight across," said a woman's voice. He left his guiding wall, and in a moment had stumbled against a little table on which were utensils of glass. Graham's eyes, now attuned to the darkness, made out a long vista with tables on either side. He went down this. At one or two of the tables he heard a clang of glass and a sound of eating. There were people then cool enough to dine, or daring enough to steal a meal in spite of social convulsion and darkness. Far off and high up he presently saw a pallid light of a semicircular shape. As he approached this, a black edge came up and hid it. He stumbled at steps and found himself in a gallery. He heard a sobbing and found two scared little girls crouching by a railing. These children became silent at the near sound of feet. He tried to console them, but they were very still until he left them. Then, as he receded, he could hear them sobbing again. Presently he found himself at the foot of a staircase, and near a wide opening. He saw a dim twilight above this, and ascended out of the blackness into a street of moving ways again. Along this a disorderly swarm of people marched, shouting. They were singing snatches of the Song of the Revolt, most of them out of tune. Here and there torches flared, creating brief hysterical shadows. He asked his way and was twice puzzled by that same thick dialect. His third attempt won an answer he could understand. He was 2 miles from the Wind Vane offices in Westminster, but the way was easy to follow. Excuse me. When at last he did approach the district of the Wind Vane offices, it seemed to him, from the cheering processions that came marching along the ways, from the tumult of rejoicing, and finally from the restoration of the lighting of the city, that the overthrow of the council must already be accomplished. And still no news of his absence came to his ears. The re-illumination of the city came with startling abruptness. Suddenly he stood blinking. All about him men halted, dazzled, and the world was incandescent. The light found him already upon the outskirts of the excited crowds that choked the ways near the Wind Vane offices, and the sense of visibility and exposure that came with it turned his colourless intention of joining Ostrog to a keen anxiety. Excuse me. For a time he was jostled. My throat really is going for it. Obstructed and endangered by men hoarse and weary with cheering his name, some of them bandaged and bloody in his cause. The frontage of the Wind Vane offices was illuminated by some moving picture, but what it was he could not see, because in spite of his strenuous attempts, the density of the crowd prevented his approaching it. From the fragments of speech he caught, he judged it conveyed news of the fighting about the council house. Ignorance and indecision made him slow and ineffective in his movements. For a time he could not conceive how he was to get within the unbroken facade of this place. Sorry, just going to clear my throat. It really is having a go tonight. He made his way slowly into the midst of this mass of people, until he realized that the descending staircase of the central way led to the interior of the buildings. This gave him a goal, but the crowding in the central path was so dense that it was long before he could reach it. And even then he encountered intricate obstruction, and had an hour of vivid argument, first in this guard-room, and then in that, before he could get a note taken to the one man of all men who was most eager to see him. His story was laughed to scorn at one place, and wiser for that, when at last he reached a second stairway, he professed simply to have news of extraordinary importance for Ostrog. What it was he would not say. They sent his note reluctantly. For a long time he waited in a little room at the foot of the lift shaft, and thither at last came Lincoln, eager, apologetic, astonished. He stopped in the doorway, scrutinizing Graham, then rushed forward effusively. "Yes," he cried, "it is you, and you are not dead." Graham made a brief explanation. "My brother is waiting," explained Lincoln. "He is alone in the Wind Vane offices. We feared you had been killed in the theatre. He doubted, and things are very urgent still in spite of what we are telling them there, or he would have come to you." They ascended a lift, passed along a narrow passage, crossed a great hall, empty save for 2 hurrying messengers, and entered a comparatively little room whose only furniture was a long settee and a large oval disk of cloudy, shifting grey, hung by cables from the wall. There Lincoln left Graham for a space, and he remained alone without understanding the smoky shapes that drove slowly across the disk. His attention was arrested by a sound that began abruptly. It was cheering, the frantic cheering of a vast but very remote crowd, a roaring exultation. This ended as sharply as it had begun, like a sound heard between the opening and shutting of a door. In the outer room was a noise of hurrying steps, and a melodious clinking, as if a loose chain was running over the teeth of a wheel. Then he heard the voice of a woman, the rustle of unseen garments. "It is Ostrog," he heard her say. A little bell rang fitfully, and then everything was still again. Presently came voices, footsteps and movement without. The footsteps of some one person detached itself from the other sounds and drew near, firm, evenly measured steps. The curtain lifted slowly. A tall, white-haired man, clad in garments of cream-coloured silk, appeared, regarding Graham from under his raised arm. For a moment the white form remained holding the curtain, then dropped it and stood before it. Graham's first impression was of a very broad forehead, very pale blue eyes, deep sunken under white brows, an aquiline nose and a heavily lined resolute mouth. The folds of flesh over the eyes, the drooping of the corners of the mouth contradicted the upright bearing, and said the man was old. Graham rose to his feet instinctively, and for a moment the 2 men stood in silence, regarding each other. "You are Ostrog?" said Graham. "I am Ostrog, the boss, so I am called." Graham felt the inconvenience of the silence. "I have to thank you chiefly, I understand, for my safety," he said presently. "We were afraid you were killed," said Ostrog, "or sent to sleep again, forever. We have been doing everything to keep our secret, the secret of your disappearance. Where have you been? How did you get here?" Graham told him briefly. Ostrog listened in silence. He smiled faintly. "Do you know what I was doing when they came to tell me you had come?" "How can I guess?" "Preparing your double." "My double?" "A man as like you as we could find. We were going to hypnotize him, to save him the difficulty of acting. It was imperative. The whole of this revolt depends on the idea that you are awake, alive, and with us. Even now a great multitude of people has gathered in the theatre, clamouring to see you. They do not trust, you know, of course, something of your position." Sorry, I think the toning there was slightly off on my part, but oh well. "Very little," said Graham. "It is like this." Ostrog walked a pace or 2 into the room and turned. "You are absolute owner," he said, "of the world. You are king of the earth. Your powers are limited in many intricate ways, but you are the figurehead, the popular symbol of government, this White Council, the Council of Trustees as it is called. I have heard the vague outline of these things. I wondered. I came upon a garrulous old man. And with that, we actually come to the end of the episode. So, I will say thank you very much for joining today. I hope you all have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon, or night, no matter what time of day it is. I hope you all have a wonderful one of it. And as always, we will be back tomorrow for more of the logging. Goodbye.